Welcome, everyone, to Her Power 2025. We're thrilled you're here with us today. This gathering comes at a pivotal moment for gender equality and women's rights. As we gather in New York City during the 69th Commission on the Status of Women, we mark not only the past 3 decades since the historic Beijing Declaration, but also the 25th anniversary of the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. This incredible gathering serves as a testament to the resilience, creativity, and strength of women worldwide. Today, we stand united to acknowledge the progress and the setbacks that we've experienced on this journey toward equality. A new report by UN Women notes that while some progress has been made on girls' education and access to family planning, a woman or girl is killed every 10 minutes by a partner or family member. And 1 in 4 governments worldwide reported a backlash to gender equality and women's rights last year. Only 87 countries have ever been led by a woman, so we have our work cut out for us. Our mission today is clear: to harness our collective power and galvanize a movement that uplifts women and girls from all walks of life, especially those affected by conflict and crisis. Throughout the program, you'll hear inspiring stories and be part of an exchange of ideas that can propel us forward. As we embark on this journey together, let's amplify our commitment to creating a world where every woman and girl can thrive, regardless of her circumstances. Before we begin the formal part of our program, I do want to take a moment to extend a heartfelt thank you to our partners for this year's Her Power: the International Center for Research in Women, Mama Cash, Sol de Janeiro, and the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. Also, a big thank you to artist Michelle Pred for her powerful installation, Power of the Purse. If you haven't seen it, please check out her work after the program, for those of you in the room. And for those of you online, we'll be posting pictures shortly after we wrap up the program. A few housekeeping notes. For those of you in the room, you'll find a number of items on your seat: an agenda and speaker guide, a QR code, links to the day's agenda, and speaker bios. You will also find a copy of the latest issue of Foreign Policy magazine, which explores European security prospects without the certainty of a U.S. defense shield, and analysis produced by FP Analytics, Foreign Policy's independent research division, on the economic impacts of menopause, something that half the world's population will experience at some point in their lives, and 2, the efforts to strengthen reproductive health care, both of which are produced with support from Bayer. We also encourage you to read the new FP Analytics Insight Brief, Advancing Democracy, Development, and Peace Through Women-Led Activism. It's on funding gender equity and women-led movements, and you can find that at fpanalytics.foreignpolicy.com. This report was produced with support from Mama Cash. We appreciate all participants, both here and online, who submitted questions in advance. Although we won't be able to address all of them, we did select questions and we'll be integrating them into the program. And with that, please enjoy the program.
For our opening conversation on leadership in defining moments, please welcome the Honorable Chrystia Freeland, former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of Canada, in conversation with Foreign Policy's CEO and publisher, Andrew Solinger.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
I'm great.
One more time. Hi, everyone. How are you? Good afternoon. We're lifting up the room. I love it. I am so super excited, not just to be here for another Her Power, and it's not just another Her Power, it's a fantastic Her Power. It's one of my favorite events that FP puts on each year, but I'm super excited and honored to be here with the Honorable Chrystia Freeland of Canada. A round of applause for Chrystia, please. There's a little Chrystia Andrew history. We worked together at the Financial Times when we were kids, and Chrystia was the managing editor of the Americas, and I was the managing director of the Americas, which basically meant I reported into her and tried to make the business go round, but she produced all the fantastic work that you know and love from the Financial Times, and with an amazing career in journalism, then decided, hey, I think I'll embark on a career as a politician, equally as successful, and a fantastic journey that you've had. We'd love to talk a little bit about that today and have you share that with us. So thanks for joining us. I wanted to start off and talk a little bit about you and your political career. You are just coming off having been Deputy Prime Minister for 5 years of Canada, Finance Minister, and the first woman Finance Minister of Canada for 4 years, more than 4 years. Your work is evidenced in the trade negotiations with Trump 7 years ago, culminating in USMCA. You rolled out a national childcare program in Canada.
$10 a day across the country. Big deal.
That should be really celebrated and replicated. And with Ukraine, importantly, with Ukrainian heritage, a strong supporter and advocate for Ukraine, and not just starting in 2022, well before then. And Ukraine has a very large, Canada has a very large Ukrainian ethnic population, so that of which Krishna is one. So that is a fantastic work that you've done. A few lessons from your leadership, if you could share. What have you learned in this time? And you could go back to journalism as well, as a women leader, finding her way and blazing this path through journalism, through politics. A lesson or two, maybe, that you could share right at the top.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm sure everyone here has wonderful lessons to share, and I would love to hear from all the women who are here, and we all have our own path and our own story. But let me share 3 thoughts. The first one is, and I said this, I had the privilege of introducing Janet Yellen at an event here in New York. I think it was 2024. The Atlantic Council was honoring her as an international leader. And what I said about Janet is something I really believe in, which is, in introducing her, I said, you know, Janet, I have heard you be introduced many, many times as the first woman Secretary of the Treasury of the United States and as the first woman chair of the Fed of the United States. Those things are true, and they're part of who you are. But I want to introduce you as an outstanding Secretary of the Treasury, full stop, and an outstanding chair of the Fed, full stop. And so the first thing I would say is, you know, I have never applied for a job and said, hire me because I'm a woman. And I have never run for office and said, vote for me because I'm a woman. And I think there can be something a little bit patronizing about suggesting that, right? I've always said, pick me because I'm the best. Pick me because I'm going to work the hardest. Pick me because I'm the right choice. And I would sort of urge us as women to have the confidence to do and say that. I would also say, I think it was Diana who said, you know, there is a backlash right now. So I would also say, don't not hire me because I'm a woman. Don't not vote for me because I'm a woman. And I think we should all be a little bit worried that maybe some of that is starting to creep back in. You know, I thought my mother's generation was going to be the last generation that had to deal with that, but unfortunately, maybe not. So that would be my lesson number 1 is that. My lesson number 2 is I have 2 daughters and a son. And a big difference I've noticed between my daughters and my son is when my daughters make a mistake, when they made a mistake, say at school, they would just become overwhelmed with guilt and concern and really worry about not being perfect. My son, when he made a mistake, would think about it, think about how to do better, and say, Mama, it's a growth opportunity. And that, I have to say, I have learned from my son, and I encourage my daughters to learn from that too. And I think still we raise our girls, and we ourselves have been raised to be perfect, to always try to do everything exactly right, and to really beat ourselves up when we don't. And that can feel like a virtue when you're doing it because you've been raised to be that way, but it actually can be crippling because we're never going to be perfect. And for sure we're not going to be perfect if we try to do big things, right? The whole sort of move fast and break things, that's not an idea that you have to be perfect. And so my second lesson, I know this is about women's lessons in leadership, but it's a lesson from a mother of a son, is be kind to yourself. It's okay to make mistakes, and if you're not making mistakes sometimes, if you're not reaching for something you can't quite grasp, maybe you're not being bold enough. Maybe you're not being ambitious enough. And then final thing I'll say, I started off by saying, I would never say, pick me because I'm a woman, vote for me because I'm a woman. But having women at the table matters, and it makes a difference. And, you know, I was so glad that Andrew mentioned Canada's national system of early learning and childcare. In my first budget as Canada's first woman finance minister, that was the centerpiece policy. And we put a lot of money into it, about $30 billion. And to understand Canadian money on a US scale, multiply by 10, because we're 1/10 the size. So that would be like a Secretary of the Treasury putting in place a $300 billion childcare program. And our commitment is that there should be $10 a day daycare available for everyone in Canada. It has been we're just starting. We have more work to do. The system is so successful. The biggest problem is there aren't enough places. But this has been outstanding economic and social policy. It is great for kids because it's high quality education. It has been great for families with affordability. Families are saving in Canada as much as $14,000 a year per kid because of this program. People have told me I was only able to have a child because you put this in place. And crucially, it is allowing mothers to go to work. And when we first put it in the budget, one of my colleagues said, let's say it's going to allow parents to go to work. And I said, no, because this is really, I mean, let's tell the truth here. And the reality is, when you don't have affordable childcare, it is the mom who stays home. So let's say that. Let's say this is about allowing women to go to work. And we have had a huge increase already in women's labor force participation, which is really good for the economy. So it's good social policy, it's good affordability policy, and it's good economic policy. And I don't think it's an accident that it took the first woman finance minister to do it.
Fantastic, Krisha. You know, you bring up families and family care and your own kids, and I was wondering if you could spend just a minute of on your own experience raising a family as a professional in journalism as well as in politics. And herein I will share an anecdote, if I may, from our FT history. Okay, so we're going to go back, I think it's like 15 years ago. It's 2010, and we are having an event in Florida. I think it was at the Naples Ritz-Carlton with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, CME, massive financial institution, very big advertiser for FT. And they wanted Krisha to speak. And so I asked Krisha, and Krisha said, that's cool, but I have a brand new baby Ivan, and I'm breastfeeding. And I am bringing, if you want me to come, I will come, but I'm bringing Ivan, and I'm bringing you're paying for my Ukrainian nanny as well, who spoke Ukrainian to Ivan, by the way. So does he speak Ukrainian?
He certainly does.
Outstanding. So going to keep more on this, actually, that maybe Christian will kill me, but I have to say this. One of the things
I'll kill him afterwards. I won't do it on stage if needed.
One of the things that we did at this event was we recorded a show that Christian had, a weekly video show. It was called View from the Top. And in View from the Top, we would interview a big dog in finance. So the setup was to interview Terry Duffy, the CEO of the CME. And we had set up a studio upstairs in a suite in the hotel. And I walk in before Terry Duffy's supposed to be there, and there is Christia with Ivan, breastfeeding Ivan. I'm like, oh my God, I'm sorry. She's like, no, Andrew, come in. It's totally cool. Come on in. And I'm like, well, Terry Duffy's going to be here in a second. She's like, well, Ivan's not done. So Terry Duffy walks in a second later, and he's like, whoa, I'm so sorry. And Christia says, no, it's great. Come on in. It's all good. And then I'm going to give me a second. And she goes and hands Ivan to Terry Duffy. This captain of finance who grew up in the Chicago, Merc pits, the guys with the colored jackets, and they're yelling at each other, tough guy, De Beers, that kind of guy, is immediately Googling, Ivan, would you be, and then they hand Ivan off and do the interview, and this guy is silly putty for Christian for the interview. So that's one way that you had your kids while you were a professional. Tell us, though, if that's a fair story. You're not going to kill me, I guess. If that's true, did you have other experiences like that? How did you juggle?
I had forgotten that story. It is a true story. And I do want to say to you, Andrew, and to the Financial Times, thank you for helping me to have babies and also have a job. So choosing a good employer, and we can't always choose our employer, really does matter. And then other things I would say are, as maybe Andrew's story illustrates, don't be ashamed of being a mother. I am so, for me, being a mother, it's at the heart of who I am. And I think I bring that mother strength to every job I do, to everything I do, certainly to being an elected leader. And I think it is, earlier generations of women who wanted to work and have babies, I think sometimes had to pretend that they weren't, almost pretend they weren't women, but certainly pretend they weren't mothers. And it's not so long ago that women would get fired from their jobs when they married or when they had children. So no blame to them. But certainly for me, and I encourage everyone, be proud of being a mom and have it be part of who you are. I think it can be a great form of leadership. Two other things I'll say, and these are more just personal to me. Andrew asked me, how do you manage to do these things? This goes back to my point about tolerance of imperfection, and my kids get very mad when I say what I'm about to say. I think I have the messiest house in Canada. They say it's not that bad. Actually, it is that bad. I try to be a good cook, but I do definitely let the housekeeping slide. You can't do everything. I think that all of us as parents, as mothers, find your own balance, I would say. And for me, with my kids, I didn't take long maternity leaves. I went back to work quickly. But I wanted to stay close to them. And Andrew's story sort of reveals that. So my thing that I did, and I sort of committed to myself and my babies, that I would exclusively nurse them until they were a year old. So they never had formula. And that meant doing things like, nursing a baby before you're going to interview a CEO. But it was a way that I felt, maybe it was as much for me as it was for them. It was a way that I felt I was doing something only a mother could do for them and really being there for them. I tell them this story sometimes when their friends are around, how long they've been nursed. They find it less charming than you guys do today.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for remembering that story as well. I was so hoping that you'd be like, what are you talking about? We have to talk about some current events if we can.
There seem to be events.
And we only have 5 minutes
now.
left, so we're going to do a little bit of a speed round. So there was obviously an election that just took place on Sunday. Mark Carney won, Liberal leadership contest. You did not. What lessons can you share with us? And you just talked about setbacks and your son learning from setbacks. What's a learning that you can share from that?
Well, a few. I mean, first thing I would say is this was a leadership race inside the Liberal Party, and those are different from any other political contest I've been in because it's inside your family, right? So it's among friends who, and like Mark is literally my friend. He is the godfather of Yvonne, who we've just been talking about. And it's a race among people who have a shared objective. And in our case, our objective is to fight for Canada and stand for Canada. I'm afraid in opposition to some of the stuff you guys are doing to us. And also to defeat our Conservative Party in the next general election. And so I was always clear that that was the contest, and the internal conversation was an internal conversation. But the other things I will say are, I have never had as much fun in politics as I did during our leadership race. For me, it was a personal liberation and a chance to be totally my own person. And that's what you get to be when it's your campaign, when it's your thing. I know that there are people here who are CEOs of companies or founders of their own startup. I bet the feeling is similar, and it's scary, it's hard, but I have to say I loved it. And I would do it again in a minute. And going back to my Yvonne point right off the top, I would say to everyone here, take risks. Go for the top job. Even if you don't get it, you will learn so much, and I think you will reveal to people who you are in a really positive way.
Great. Okay, we have 2.5 minutes. We're going to do a speed round right now.
I'm sorry, that wasn't speed.
No, that's all good. So we're going to really cruise through current events now. We just dropped a story on FP by Kevin Lynn. You can look at it online if you're on our platform.
Please do that. Support journalism.
Yes, please do. Trump is undermining the Canadians most sympathetic to him because there's a surge of anti-Americanism in Canada. That is putting Conservatives in a spot because Pierre Poilievre, the head of the Conservative Party, and presumably, or up until recently, leader in the race in Canada, has been a kind of a Trump guy. Is that accurate? Is Trump giving the Liberal Party a shot in the arm?
I would say Pierre Poilievre is giving the Liberal Party a shot in the arm because the reality is, we have a House of Commons, right? So we have question period. It's the closest you get to gladiatorial combat in politics. And we actually stand up and basically yell at each other. So one day in question period, I was taking leaders around, so I was taking questions from Pierre Poilievre. And he said something very denigrating of Canada. And I said, you have an inferiority complex vis-a-vis the United States. You are always talking Canada down. All you are is maple syrup MAGA. And I'm quite proud of myself. Yeah, it's good, right? And I just came up with it on my feet. I've repeated it approximately 1 million times since. And that is the truth. It was true then. This was before the election, your election. But since then, we have seen, and I say this in sorrow but also in anger, real threats from your president against my country. A barrage of, threats of an imposition of economic warfare and explicit statements about how this economic coercion is going to be used to force us to become the 51st state. Okay? I can't even believe I said that, but that is true. And I'm so proud of Canadians. I have never seen the country so patriotic. I'm wearing a little Canadian flag, but this is unusual. We're not a big flag-waving country. But now everyone is wearing a flag. Restaurants are pulling American wine off their menus. Canadians are, like, you have these special apps that tell you how not to buy American stuff in the grocery store. Everyone is very proud of that. And it's not because we don't like you. We like you individually so much. We do, like, we really do. But, you know, we love our country, and we're going to stand and fight for our country. And Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, is a maple syrup MAGA. Canadians know that, and Canadians, I think quite rightly, are saying to themselves, how can this guy ever stand up to Trump? He just wants to imitate Trump. The only job he wants is to be the apprentice.
So that's narrowed the gap quite a bit, and there is now it's a race. Trump has actually kind of undone his goals on that front. You also kick our ass in hockey. I don't know if you have any hockey fans here, but there was a big match just a couple of weeks ago, one of the best hockey games I've ever seen. And we're in a bit of a spat right now over tariffs. Let's talk about tariffs for a second and just touch on that. I can't even, I'm like looking as I'm coming here on the news on different reciprocal tariffs right now. I think the latest is that there's now 25% tariffs on U.S. aluminum and steel that Minister LeBlanc, the finance minister, has put on the U.S. We're in full battle right now. Doug Ford was threatening to pull electricity from Michigan and Minnesota and New York. And he's trying to negotiate on that. And Carney said, in trade, as in hockey, Canada will win. That sounds great, but how do you do that without cutting growth, raising unemployment, and creating rampant inflation? We're worried about that here in the U.S. It'd be a real nightmare for Canada.
Well, first of all, inflation is much lower in Canada than in the United States, and economic growth is stronger. And also, by the way, our fiscal position is much stronger than yours. We have a much lower deficit. We have much lower debt. We maybe had a good finance minister going into all of this. So we come into it with a strong balance sheet. And I would just say two things to you guys. First of all, Wall Street Journal got it right when this started and described this threatened, because it was at the time threatened tariff war, as the dumbest trade war in history. So, dear Americans, it's just self-mutilation. It is really dumb. Like, the reality is, the stuff you buy from us, you don't buy it because, like, somehow you're feeling like hugging a Canadian. You buy our potash, which is an essential fertilizer. We provide you with 80% of your potash. So do you just not want fertilizer? We sell you oil, gas, electricity. Do you want to freeze in the dark? Truly, we sell you uranium. We sell you critical minerals and metals. You buy these things from us because you actually need them. And then the other thing that I think Americans don't always reflect on, because look, Canadians, we are America experts because our survival depends on it. Americans, you guys don't really think about Canada very much, I'm kind of assuming. So a thing you probably don't know is we are your largest market, and not by a little bit. You export more to Canada than to China, Japan, the UK, and France combined. And your guys are supposed to be the entrepreneurs, right? Like, it was Marshall Fields who said the customer is always right. Well, we are your customer. And so it's not really a very good way to get us to buy your stuff. No.
Christia, well, I'm getting evil eyes right now, but we're not going to end this conversation without talking about Ukraine. So, like a shot of espresso, strong and quick. There's a ceasefire on, and I know it's not leaving enough time. There's a ceasefire proposal on the table. There were Sturm and Drang in the Oval Office a couple of Fridays ago with Zelensky and Trump and Vance. How do you see, and I'll let me phrase this one question in this way. It looks like there's something that they're taking to Putin right now for a ceasefire and then a negotiation. Would you give Trump a win if this results in a ceasefire that has Zelensky's now modified sort of demands baked into it?
From my perspective, the only people whose opinion matters here are the Ukrainians. And, we have to be clear on the facts. Ukraine is a democracy which was illegally invaded by a neighboring dictatorship, entirely unprovoked. And the only thing the Ukrainians are doing is fighting for their democracy and fighting for their sovereignty. And there has been, talk about, are they grateful enough? I've heard the Ukrainians be really, really grateful everywhere they go. But from my perspective, I am grateful to the Ukrainians. They have not asked anyone else, they have not asked Canadians, they have not asked Americans to go and stand shoulder to shoulder with them and die. They are fighting for democracy. They're fighting for the rules-based order, which is the idea that at its heart, right, just because you're bigger than your neighbor and have more guns than them, you're not just allowed to invade them. And I have to say, we Canadians are finding the value of the rules-based order to be kind of more personal and more direct for ourselves than we ever imagined it would be. So I would say thank you to the Ukrainians for fighting for democracy and the rules-based international order, and we should be standing with them. Ukrainians, I am, as Andrew said, I'm Ukrainian Canadian. I talk to people in Ukraine and also the government often. No one wants Ukrainians to stop dying faster than the Ukrainians themselves. But they want a peace which is just and which is sustainable. And they have the right to that.
Slava Ukraine. Christian Freeland, thank you so much.
Slava Ukraini! Thanks a lot.
Please welcome our panelists, Tanya Ann Brodber, Head of Secretariat of the United Nations Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, Shaza Bala El Mahdi, the Sudan Country Director for the Center for International Private Enterprise, and Anne Haven, the First Secretary for Peace and Security from the Permanent Mission of Norway to the United Nations, for conversation on women-led peace building with our moderator, Foreign Policy's Alison Carlson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for joining us online. And how about another round of applause for Christian Freeland? Thank you so much for joining us. And I will say, just as we kick off, I'm from Minnesota, and I care about Canada quite deeply and think about Canada quite a bit. But so many important points were raised. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. So many important points were raised during that discussion about the role of women in leadership, the role of women in motherhood, and the role of women in peace building. We are finding ourselves at a time in history where the world has just come out of a series of elections around the world. We are in a major state of political transition and one of conflict, change, and a need to come together for a lasting peace. Thank you. We're also sitting here alongside the anniversary on the Convention on the Status of Women, and we are approaching the 25th anniversary of the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. I have the honor today of being with three women who have and continue to work on the front lines of the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. And it's at this moment where we are all experiencing transition, tension, and the need to come together for a more sustainable peace. And I'm absolutely thrilled to dive into discussion with all of you so that we can hear from your experience and learn from your leadership. Tony, I'd like to turn to you first. As we're approaching this 25th anniversary of the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda, how would you characterize the present landscape? And what do we, in this moment in time, need to be prioritizing?
Thank you for the question, and thank you so much for foreign policy for this event and this moment. The current landscape is not what we thought it would have been 25 years ago when the Security Council established Resolution 1325. It's not what we thought it would be when actually my mother was part of the UN team that was at Beijing when Hillary Clinton said women's rights are human rights 30 years ago. We're unfortunately now trying to make the case for why gender should be on the agenda. We're making the case for why women should be in the room when it has been proven that if women are not in the room in peacekeeping processes, we don't have durable peace. So it's not what we would like it to be, but what I can say is that women, especially women in local organizations in the Ukraine, in Sudan, in South Sudan, Afghanistan, Palestine, Congo, they will not be defeated. I was just at a Ukrainian event at Scandinavia House with the government of Sweden, and a Ukrainian woman who leads the Ukrainian fund said, there's a saying in the Ukraine, she said it in Ukrainian, I'm not there yet, but she then translated it to English, and it was, nothing can stop an idea whose time has come. And I felt like the time was 30 years ago, but today what we are seeing is that the time has come. We must act clearly, coordinated, for peace.
The time has certainly come. You are absolutely right. And picking up on another comment that was made during the previous conversation about, and your comments just now about having a seat at the table. And I'd like to turn to you. You have been working in diplomatic peace processes now and from a multicultural or multilateral perspective for quite some time. You know what it means to have a seat at the table. And Anne, when you're thinking about the work that you've done in Afghanistan and elsewhere on behalf of Norway, what are some of the experiences that you've had and lessons you've learned about having a seat at the table, the importance of that, and what we need to focus on now in terms of implementation?
Thank you so much from me as well for the invitation for the Norwegian mission to be here and foreign policy for this event. I'm a proud diplomat from the Norwegian government because they actually have peace and mediation at its heart. And when we were in the Security Council, women, peace and security were one of our 4 priorities, which I didn't realize until I started working more abroad and in other parts of the world that it's not the rule, it's more the exception. So I think one important thing we need to do is to try to make other governments aware of this and champion that idea that it's not only something you do when there's peace or when other things are settled and then you jump in with one peace and security agenda. It's one core priority that has to be streamlined in all the work that we do in different parts of conflicts. So when one thing I thought to mention that when we work in peace processes, for example, the one in Afghanistan, one thing that is striking is that the challenges that the women of Afghanistan are facing are the exact same challenges that women in Norway faces when they want to be led in the boardroom, or I remember stories that my mom or my grandma told me, and then it's remarkable, you go to a completely different side of the world and then you ask the woman, why are they not letting you into the room in the peace process or in the decision-making process, and the arguments they're met with are similar. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of power in uniting. We have mediation networks, Nordic mediation networks, global mediation networks. So we need to unite together to have discussions and create awareness. Another thing that is important is to bring the men into the discussion. Always when we have this meeting and events, like if we look here, where are the men? It's mostly women. So I think each one of us also, there's a lot of work into engagement. I don't think it's conscious of them to not kind of prioritize it and be aware of it, but they need to be reminded the importance of women and inclusion of women in peace processes and in peace and security work, because it's not something, you don't share power if you're not reminded why you have to. So I think that's something that in my experience, to engage the men and engage the ones who are sitting with the power, and if they are if you take them into the discussion, then you can actually have concrete results. One last thing I wanted to mention is to change the narrative of women as like victims and sympathize with women, because there's no quality that women lack to be at the table. There's nothing that men do better. There's no research whatsoever who shows that a man can do mediation or negotiations better than a woman. It's simply that, they actually did some research on this in Norway. Why are there so many women they have the same education, they work in law firms, they work in economics, but then at the top, they're not there. And a lot of things, the signs are that you hire people similar to you. And I completely agree with the last speaker who said, I don't want to be hired because I'm a woman, but to be hired, you have to kind of break through what we call the glass ceiling. And then you need actually you have some other techniques. You have to think very creatively how to get there, because if men are not reminded why they have to, they will choose someone who is similar to them. And that's a lot of research point to that there needs to be some sort of techniques how to get women in the room, to have the experience, to not be met with the argument in Afghanistan or in Norway, you cannot be in the room because only the most experienced persons are in the room, and you lack the experience. So yeah.
You raised so many important points about women in leadership and in positions of decision-making authority, and the role of diplomacy. And we have incredible perspectives at the multilateral level, but also it's striking how important it is to have women at the local level and on the front lines. And Shaza, I'd like to turn to you. You are joining us from Sudan, and thank you for traveling all of this way. I know jet lag, and are so thrilled and honored to have you here. You are working on the front lines. So where, from your perspective, is the role of civil society organizations and those really working on the ground to realize what the vision has been of the Security Council Resolution 1325 and really making the Women, Peace, and Security agenda real?
Thank you. Thank you for Foreign Policy, WPHF, and all of you for coming here today. I really appreciate this discussion. I think it's coming right on time, especially for Sudanese women in particular. I'm one of them. And I'm sure you've been following the news about Sudan. As I'm coming today to this event, a friend texted me and she said there are like 5 women in South Khartoum passed away while delivering babies because they don't have access to hospitals. And this is because 85% of Khartoum hospitals have been bombed during this war. And I'm talking about a fact that's very simple. While we're talking about access to daycare, access to other things in different parts of the world, is very critical to see the contrast. How access to very fundamental right, which is the right to life, is lost because of the conflict. And I think it's a collective kind of responsibility as well. I look at it as if we can't look at women, peace and security issues during conflict as an integral part of us women, global women movements, I don't think there is a point, because it's just very connected in so many ways. And looking at Sudan over the last 5 years, Sudan is a very interesting country. It's gone through a revolution that was great, led by women, and then a coup a year later, and then a war a year and a half later. And the war is still happening. There is massive displacement, 13 million. It's like closer to a double of the size of the population of New York, 3 million more than the size of population of Sweden. That's massive displacement, the largest displacement on earth. And when you think about that, the majority of those are women accompanied by their children, which is big and huge, and in most of the times underreported. In 2024, 50% of our humanitarian assistance was actually satisfied, which is good. It's less than the Ukrainian, of course, and the other priorities in this global kind of politics. But at the end of the day, we lost half of that because USAID has been frozen, and USAID was supportive for half of this aid. So now we're left with 25%. As we're starting the 2025, as of March, only 5% of the humanitarian needs have been satisfied. And this is affecting everyone in the country. And I think that the entire world need to rethink about that. Even for 1325, as a tool that has been given to governments to implement women, peace, and security, in a country like Sudan, that has no functional state, two armed fighting parties. Each one has territories that are controlled by that party. There is no functional government. There is no jurisdiction. There is no judiciary system. There is no justice. There is no access to justice. There is no accountability. And actually, one of the reasons why we have this war is because there is no accountability since the Darfur war in 2003, because the perpetrators are the same. The Rapid Support Forces, who committed sexual violence back in the days 22 years ago, and they're doing the same now. What happened in those 22 years, I think the mechanism of implementing accountability hasn't been done, despite the fact that we've had the ICC, we've had all those resolutions and fancy kind of conventions and everything around that. But it wasn't working in the case of Sudan, and I think we need to rethink what didn't work and how to make it work. Not because of the people of Sudan, but to prevent future conflicts that are probably going to happen. And just one thing that I would like to mention is also how the sexual violence goes underneath this war is really huge and underreported in most of the times. And we know if the state itself or non-state actors like the RSF committing sexual violence or gender-based violence against women during the war, it's more likely that will continue 5 years even after stopping the war itself. And this is reported in so many research. And I think it's very fundamental to continue kind of pushing this big rock in terms of ensuring women participation in peace, ensuring women participation in leadership. Pushing this big rock cannot happen by the Sudanese women bare hands. We definitely need the world to stand behind that and support the civil society. As I said, you have a collapsing government, then the alternative is to support the civil society, and I think the civil society has been doing a great job so far, especially when the international community kind of couldn't access hot spots during the conflict because of absence of safe corridors and because of absence of access. But those frontliners are still there, and they do their work, most of the times in a non-institutionalized way, but this is what they got, and I think we need to keep supporting them.
Thank you. You paint a very vivid picture of what's happening on the ground and the need to connect funding and actions that are happening at the multilateral level to the ground in Sudan and elsewhere. Tony, I'd like to turn to you. Prior to your leadership role at the UN Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, you've been working with UN women in fragile settings around the world, in the Caribbean, in Haiti, in South Africa, and elsewhere. And when you think about the comments that Shaza just made and the need to connect those dots, how are you thinking about your priorities in your role now, and what you're going to be focusing on and investing in as part of UN Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund?
So, just to clarify, I did work and I love UN Women. It's an important organization, but the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund is the United Nations Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund. And we work through UN Women, we work through UNFPA, who needs our support more than ever for the reasons that Shaza just spoke to in the Ukraine. Some of the research has shown that from 4,000, now 9 million women do not have access to the kind of contraceptive and reproductive health care that they need since the issue with the pause of the aid. But what it is that is in my mind right now is to move from thinking of this as fragility in terms of the states and the women. These are empowered, powerful women who have chosen to stay in their countries. Those that leave are still doing the work for their countries. So a priority for me is to ensure that we continue to raise the funding required to get directly to them, because they know what needs to be done, and they're there. They're not leaving. They can't in many in many cases, and in others they won't. So we need to continue to do the collaboration with the government of Norway, who sits on our board, and we're very grateful for them, for the government of Canada. The government of the UK stepped up immediately when some of the pause happened, and they said, where can we fill the gap? But then there are also private sector women and men who have come to the table. We had global luminaries who raised money for us immediately. Because the world is shifting, I believe in multilateralism. We cannot give it up. The UN Charter from 80 years ago is one that we need to stand by. I think it's feminist in its very thinking. It started about equality between women and men from the very beginning. And we need to recognize funding cannot only come through taxpayers in aid. We also need to step up. Each and every one of us step up and put our money where we want to see results.
Thank you for that. And when you think about, Anne, when you think about the allocation of capital and funding and the issues that were very importantly brought up about accountability and implementation, how are you thinking about that and also working with partners to ensure that those dollars and other currencies, as scarce as they are going to the people on the front lines who need it most?
No, that's, I mean, sometimes people say, wow, are you spending that much money on peace processes? But imagine the amount of money that goes to war and the military equipment and so on. It's so small the percentage that the world is spending on peace. So I think there is so much to gain from, again, yeah, and the most important thing is to fund the women and the people on the ground, as was mentioned. There are so many powerful, resilient women out there. It's remarkable because they have been fighting in other parts of the world their whole life, much more than we have. Because I had generations above me who did all the dirty work, and now there's a lot left for my generation to do, but it's more of the implementation. We have the normative framework, we have the money, we have the political priority, and then it comes to the implementation that is not going as, I mean, it's shockingly slow. So there is a lot to do in my part of the world, but I think we also should look to those countries that is kind of the weakest link, not because of the women that are there, because they are incredible, but they don't have those politicians who do the job for them. So they, one example is Afghanistan. So, and I think that everyone can do more by making awareness around these situations, because the world is turning more and more global. So now when Afghan women cannot go to school, even they have even lost the opportunity to go to nursing school from now December, that will also impact. We already see in the region with the Houthis in Yemen, and it will also impact us, because it's so difficult to build up the resolution 1325. This work has been done for decades, and it's so quick to turn it, like, destroy it. So we need to be much more self-aware and conscious about keeping the normative framework and protecting it. And if you're not in a position to do so much with your own country or position, at least turn to the one who needs it the most and help them. And one easy thing to do is just create awareness amongst politicians, because they do what their voters want them to do. So I think that's one, when we see this, I don't know if I want to call it a backlash, because in many parts of the world things have been much more difficult for a long time, but I think with the globalization of the world, this is going to impact us if we don't spend time to think about it and try to do what we can do to support women in other parts of the world.
Very well said. We are just out of time, but I do want to ask both of you, Tony, and then Shaz, I'll end with you, and picking up on Anne's comments regarding the importance of multilateralism, but also the recognition that it can be slow. There is no time. We need to catalyze action. And so thinking of this week in New York and going forward, Tony, I'd like to ask you, and then Shaza, what is your call to action? What needs to be prioritized, and what can concretely be done to move faster so that the impact on the ground can be felt?
I think Anne spoke to it, and our politicians do really. It doesn't feel like it all the time, but the politicians are listening to their citizens. And I think it's important for everyone not to give up or to lose hope. If women in Afghanistan, if women in Sudan, if women in the Congo and Haiti aren't, we can't. Where we have a little bit more privilege and a little bit more say, make sure that our representatives know we matter and we must be at the table when it comes to peace and everything else. I think the other thing is for us all to invest in peace. Invest in the ways in which you can, whether it is giving to an organization like WPHF or it is giving directly to an organization, speaking to your governments to make sure that they continue to support a UN Women, that they continue to support the Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women and Girls. These are direct things that you can do. And I think the third thing, and we spoke about it as well all this week, strategize. What we see happening did not happen overnight. There's strategies for pushback. We need strategies to push forward. And we need to make sure that we're doing so without division. We don't always have to agree on every single thing, but we all agree that women need to be at the table for many things, from the boardroom to the peace room, and we need to be on the same page as to how we push that forward.
Thank you. Shaza, over to you.
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, I tend to look at the conflict itself as an opportunity for Sudanese women. The transformation is huge. I mean, the conflict did shake the economy, the security status, and everything, but it did shake the patriarchal community as well. It did shake how women's role has been perceived in that community. And those displaced women and the women who have been facing the war itself have gone through some sort of transformations. Some of them has been leaders in their communities because of this war. And I look at it as an opportunity. It does save us a lot of money we used to spend in terms of empowering women, but the war did part of that work for us. And I look at this struggle globally, the phasing out of gender-related programs and somehow the conservative governments in the world and freezing fund and everything. I look at it as an opportunity for us to look for alternative, innovative mechanisms and solutions, even financially. What could be done in this situation? We can't wait for 4 years or maybe more to change the politics in America or to change somewhere else. What we need to do is to act right now, as the previous speaker said. And I think mobilizing the private sector to see an opportunity in supporting women, and that might change even the way we implement projects. We might think about ROI, right? How this $1 invested in women-related programs can actually generate money and economic empowerment in that particular word, and how the private sector can actually sustain the economic growth in Sudan if it gets involved, because they know how to create jobs, for instance, and it's not just aid. So I think thinking strategically in terms of mobilizing different actors into the scene of the foreign aid overall, I think is important, and also localization as well. Thinking about the local private sector, because in Sudan, when you go to Khartoum or Omdurman, where no organizations are working, you will see Coca-Cola, and you will see minerals water, and you will see some foods. So the private sector managed to make it there without asking for safe corridors, without asking for peace deal to be signed. So they know how to get to that very, very front lines. That means they have their ways, and it is functioning, and it is effective. Why don't you loop them into this aid support and plug them into the supply chain of supporting those women? This is my words.
Powerfully said. And I love this notion of mobilizing to push forward. Mm-hmm. And also identifying who is there, who's doing the work, and doing so in partnership. All of you here today and those who are joining us online are doing this work in your various respects. You have expertise to bring to the table. And, you know, it's incredible to be part of her power and to be able to convene all of you here today, because it is about identifying where does that expertise and experience lie, how can we work more effectively together to mobilize and move forward. So thank you all for your work, your presence here today, your ideas that are concrete and actionable, and spending some time with us. And best wishes this week and moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, please welcome Laura Modi, CEO of Bobby and one of Time's 2025 Women of the Year, along with Stacey Samuel, founder and executive producer of GTS Media, for a conversation on how to support working moms.
Hello, Laura Modi. I am so excited to be here with you.
I am so excited.
Here at Her Power with a powerful entrepreneur with purpose.
With purpose, here.
And that's why we're here to talk.
I am so honored to be in this room. I mean, honestly, the energy and all of the talks so far, I am so fired up.
And uplifted.
Uplifted.
And I think everyone here wants to hear from you as an entrepreneur, as someone with purpose. Based in DC, you're also in the rough and tumble of policy. So let me start with a little bit of
it.
Right, I would say. So we're going to share with everyone how you have integrated policy into your entrepreneurial enterprise. So I'm going to take it back. 5 years ago, when COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, one of the many crises that arose was a shortage of baby formula. You came up with a solution in the creation of Bobby. Now, by the way, the third largest infant formula manufacturing company in the United States. That's a major disruption.
Thank you.
Here's my question for you. So let me start with the policy. You know, in January, we're here in New York. New York State became the first state in the nation to offer paid prenatal leave.
I mean,
let's give it up, finally, right? The only in the 50 states in the union.
Yeah.
But to that, with Bobby, your company policy has sort of set up a role modeling paradigm along the lines. Can you share what Bobby is providing its workforce?
You just used the word role modeling, and it is such a beautiful word. I mean, truly. And I'll start by saying I actually think the perspective that we have in the company from its early onset into the DNA of the business has been to role model injustices that we see out there, role model how we take action. The perspective and honor that we have, the privilege that we have to be in a position to be able to look at things that are broken and say, we have an opportunity to address it. So I mentioned it goes back into the company's DNA. I did not grow up dreaming of starting a powdered milk business. This was not on my agenda in life. I was a career woman in the tech space. And I went and I had my first daughter. And as soon as I had her, I would say in that moment I was born an activist. Everywhere I turned, there was something broken. There was an injustice. There was a support system that was meant to be in place that wasn't in place. And then, in many ways, I felt lied to by the world. And I'll bridge what you just said there to starting an infant formula company. One of those was that the same government who said, hey, Laura, you should go back to work immediately because we're not going to give you the paid leave to stay at home with your child, is also within the same government who said, oh, and by the way, you should breastfeed exclusively for the next 6 months.
Right.
That conflict was the activism and really the birth of Bobby and wanting to do something about it. So with all of that energy, what we decided was let's role model being a different infant formula company. Where most infant formula companies would want to see women go back to work immediately, we wanted to fight for paid federal leave, and we decided to role model it internally. So we rolled out a 12-month parental leave policy. It's a protective parental leave policy, 4 months fully paid, and we provide a support system throughout that 12 months.
I need to repeat that. You said 12 months.
Correct.
Of paid
12 months of protective
leave.
And 4 months fully paid.
I believe only our neighbors to the north provide something similar.
Yes, I mean, I think the sad truth of it all is most countries provide adequate leave. And you see how that then contributes to everything. I mean, going back to the economy and the workplace and everything else. But rather than be frustrated with the lack of a system in place, we decided, let's role model it internally. And not only that, we then open sourced the policy, including a playbook of how another company could adopt it, and it got over 2,000 downloads by major businesses, impacting over 2 million employees.
So you have created a playbook, an outline, a framework for other companies to be successful. They are for-profit organizations.
Correct.
So you're not hoarding this
We're
information.
not hoarding the information. Everyone should get it. And here's, I mean, the sad reality is, it's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. It's a commitment you got to make to be able to role model what your future could be for another woman's past. And we're doing that.
You know, this inevitably brings up something that we had been talking about. You mentioned coexisting as a parent in the workplace.
Yes.
So while there's the opportunity for mothers and parents to spend some time with their infants, one of the greatest challenges parents have when they do go back to work is childcare. And I think we hear this over and over again. You know, the rising cost of childcare is no longer a fringe social issue. And there are some estimates that over 50% of parents and families raising children go into debt just for childcare. Because you spend so much time lobbying and pushing policy to help working families and mothers, is the child tax credit enough, do you think?
Oh, we could spend the next hour talking about this. Ooh, okay, I get very fired up. I have 4 kids. I would say everything I put in is for their care. For me to be in this position to then feed 500,000 babies.
Right.
I see childcare as a vital organ for everything else. Without that vital organ being nurtured and fed and taken care of, nothing else works, including the economy. So there's always the debate, well, what does it contribute to? You have to believe in the importance of that being a vital organ for it all to work, is the first thing. And no, the child tax credit is not enough. We have to change the entire system. And let me just start with access first, not affordability, but just access. Go back many, many decades, a century ago, when we used to look at educators and teachers as the most profound career that one should be in, because they are growing and developing our next generation. Childcare is doing exactly the same. I would say goodbye to my husband before I say goodbye to my childcare. They are the most important thing in my life.
Yeah.
They are an extension of me as a mother to be able to do my job. So I say that because when we collectively all say we need more affordable childcare, I want to be careful that the caretakers don't see that as a way to not make this a career for them. They need to be nurtured. We need to be able to grow their salary and to be able to support them being the best they can be. So we need subsidies, we need better access, we need to see it as a career. That's one of the most important things out there. And then within companies need to change their culture to be able to support families. Have childcare on staff. Build it into your system. I would say even make it part of your everyday conversation. And it sounds so simple, but even within a culture, we allow mothers, parents, fathers to be able to step out in the middle of the workday. That cultural acceptance is not a norm to be able to coexist your family life with your career.
You know, the high cost of childcare isn't the only reality for families. Particularly right now, there's a lot of food insecurity. You are the CEO and co-founder
Yes.
of an organization that feeds infants. Can you talk a little bit about how your sense of purpose and mission has extended into another part of the DNA of your organization? How do you help feed families who right now are just very challenged? I read there's something called Bobby for Change. What is that?
On the back of the infant formula shortage, I know a lot of people here aren't in the US, but you've probably heard or it's seen that in 2022, America wasn't able to feed babies. And it was a big wake-up call to the lack of resiliency that we as a country had to be able to ensure a safe supply of infant formula, which is an essential good. And in that moment, we decided we should never be in this crisis again. So we created bobbyforchange.org. And Bobby for Change is the impact arm of our company to be able to take our profit hat off and our purpose hat on and say, what are we doing to fight for a more resilient country, affordability for big policies, and essentially fight for a better America?
Okay, I'm so glad you brought up policy, because part of strengthening our domestic supply chain, which clearly was the challenge midway through the pandemic, is that there's also got to be businesses that can also compete with the larger manufacturers. You have been behind a bill that I think is being reintroduced on the floor
Yesterday.
soon. Yesterday.
Yes.
Can you talk about the Prevent Infant Formula Shortage Bill and how that's meant to address food security, insecurity, and helping small businesses actually be a part of the solution in feeding American families?
I believe there should be more Bobbies. There should be more choice for parents in how they feed their babies. And the fact that we live in a country where it's really owned by a duopoly. 2 companies feed 90% of babies. So when one of those companies has to close their facility doors or there's an issue, there's a hole. So we created this bill. And it was, my God, was it a learning of just lobbying and politics and trying to figure out how to make it all work.
Is it bipartisan, or did you find more support? I mean, we don't want to go down a rabbit hole of politics, but I mean, that is the reality right now. How do you push a bill? How does a bill get reintroduced without bipartisanship? How did you navigate that?
It was a lot of navigating over the last year. When we first introduced it a year ago, it didn't have bipartisan support. And this was under the previous administration. And I think a lot of it was related to just politics being politics and how polarized everything was. Fast forward to today, we have gotten bipartisan support. And we were able to get it reintroduced yesterday.
And your hope is for this bill to do what? To accomplish what?
The ultimate impact is that we will be able to see more manufacturers of infant formula who are raising the bar on how we feed our babies. And what it does is it gives a tax break. So if a new company, rewind 8 years ago when I started Bobby, I could come forward and say, you know what, I do want to do better for this industry and I will build new manufacturing. And the government has a fund to be able to support doing that. And I do believe, going back to politics, our democracy truly is only as strong as our ability to feed the next generation. And without making those investments, we're not building our democracy the right way.
I would agree. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but you know, I would be remiss not to point out the fact that what you're proposing, what you represent, and I think every person in this room represents, is representation.
Yes.
As a woman who's competing with big business, coming from tech, what would you say are some of the what is the North Star for Bobby and for you when you think about representation, diversity, and the benefits that brings to successful businesses like yours?
Ooh, deep question.
Oh, yes, and you have 40 seconds.
I know, 40 seconds. I hope that in the future, it's not even a question. I mean, today we are all fighting for a seat at the table. We're fighting for the obvious. We're fighting for basic human rights as women. I mean, even outside of infant formula, I watch the fight every single day. And for my 2 daughters, I really hope that we can look back in the future, and when we're talking about some of these things, the seat at the table that they're having is one that they belong at. It's not even a question, and they are the representation we need.
Thank you, Laura Modi.
Thank you so much.
Where can people find your playbook, by the way?
It's on our website, hibobby.com, and yeah, I hope you are part of one of the downloads.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Beautiful.
Next, please welcome Dr. Enino Emua, the founder of 100 Women at Davos, Happy Mwende Kinyili, the co-executive director of Mama Cash, along with Foreign Policy's Alison Carlson, for conversation on investing in women-led initiatives.
It's comfortable. We're back to pick up on an issue we started to discuss earlier that I'd like to dive into with a little bit more specificity, which is investing in women-led initiatives. And the title of this session is Power of the Purse. It is incredibly important to invest in women-led initiatives, and that's really what is at the heart of driving impact. And both of you are very much working on the front lines of that. So I'd like to dive in. You know, as has been noted already today, we are in a time of transition, and also a time when we are seeing the rollback of overseas development assistance in the US, in Europe, and elsewhere around the world. Resources are tight and increasingly constrained. However, the need is escalating. If all of you on your tables, I believe in your folders, and those online as well, a little prop, can take a look, holding too many things, can take a look at this research that was supported by Mama Cash as well, which really lays out some of the statistics about where we are with overseas development assistance and also what is needed and what is being done to drive impact on the ground. And so, Happy, I'd like to turn to you first. When you think about this landscape, how would you characterize it for the audience in terms of where we're at and what really needs to be focused on to mobilize financial resources for women-led initiatives?
Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for your invitation, and to everybody who's in the room. Ooh, that's a big question. Where I'd start? I think the first thing I want to say is we recognize that it's deliberate, the rollback on ODA, because we are relitigating fights that we thought we'd won. I was at a session earlier this week where someone was saying when they were at Beijing, when they went into the negotiations around the Beijing Platform for Action, the word gender was bracketed, meaning it was still up for conversation, debate. Was it a legitimate concept? This was 30 years ago. And we're right back there, 30 years later, where the concept again is being relitigated. We thought we'd fought that fight. And those who are invested in keeping gender bracketed and then ultimately out of the room as an issue, they recognize that if they roll back ODA, they've won the fight. because folks who are making these things possible for us, the women who are in those rooms in Beijing who ensured that gender was not bracketed, that it was an issue, it was a term, it was a legitimate concept that the United Nations as an entire multilateral agency was recognizing and working towards, those women, they fought that fight because they had resources. They had money to pay for the tickets to go to Beijing. They could eat. They could talk with their partners and their friends and strategize together. So taking away those resources is a deliberate strategy to roll back the gains. Recognizing that, then it's like, okay, fine. It was said in an earlier panel that we need to figure out how do we strategize together to counter that. We know, we've done some numbers, some preliminary numbers, which are showing us, as of today, between two governments and two significant private philanthropy agencies, we know that per year, $730 million is leaving women's rights movements. When you know that only 1% of ODA goes towards women, rolling back 730 million is a big deal, because first, we already don't have money, and then the little money that we have is being taken away. So then it's like, this is what it looks like. This is what it means when the money gets rolled back, and the impact on it is that we're not able to create change, the peace that Shaza was talking about. That's what it means. So we have to organize ourselves, come work together with each other, because while ODA is being rolled back, we know that people are also making a lot of money, right? So there is money sitting in places that it could be directed towards women-led initiatives around the world. So our aim right now in this moment is feminist funds like Mama Cash, women's funds, folks in philanthropy who are invested in gender equity. We're organizing ourselves together to see how do we unlock new resources. Because the way to get it to the women's rights organizations, that part we know how to do. The issue is how do we unlock the resources?
Thank you. And that perfectly sets up my next question about unlocking those resources. Like you said, $730 million a year is an incredible amount of money when there is the wealth out there sitting in other places and being generated elsewhere. And so I'd like to turn to you, and in your work and in the places where you're working, and also with the creation of 100 Women at Davos in particular. How are you thinking about this mobilization and reorientation of financial resources to women-led initiatives?
Well, first of all, thank you, FP, for having me here, having us here. And hello, everybody. I'm just seeing all these wonderful faces, and I've just been staring at all of you. Thank you for being here. The first thing is that, and as Happy has explained, the whole context and what's happening now. But this is a time of action. First of all, progress is never linear. When it's real, when it's serious progress. You do have times when it comes like that, right? So we mustn't be negative. What we must do is turn this around and look at it positively. So there are a couple of things that I would like to mention. The first one is, and it might seem strange, but if we look in the US and even, I think, OECD and even globally, when we look at the percentage relatively of women and men that have university degrees, women are overtaking men. What does that mean? Women, over the last 50 years, have acquired so much education, and with education comes knowledge, with knowledge comes responsibility, with responsibility comes power. What are we doing? No one can take that away from us. So we do have choices, we do have the knowledge. That's the first thing. The second thing is when we look at the money, where is the money? There is a great wealth transfer that is happening into the hands of women. $30 trillion will be in the hands of women in the next 20 years, but it's already started. So the question is, those funds are under the control of women, whether it's through intergenerational transfer, whether it's through wealth. What are women going to do? What are they starting to do with the money? One thing that we find is in terms of power, is that our male peers understand instinctively or maybe socialized that money is power. So I give you a little example in something that I was doing. It was a little project. We had not-for-profit, women. These were all high-level professional women. In fact, we had women in investment banking, etc., etc. And so we assigned people roles. Okay, so who would do the outreach, who would be handling finance, etc. Do you know that we couldn't get one woman who would accept to take up the finance role? Now, if I assure you, because I work in corporate banking, that if it had been male-led, you'd find the opposite, because that is where the power is. So as women, we need to exercise our power. There is a lot of wealth that is out there heading into the hands of women, or already into the hands of women, and we do see that women with wealth spend relatively more in proportion on initiatives, philanthropic initiatives, than their male peers. So that is one area that I feel that we need to actually look at and think of it ourselves. Wealth is just any amount of cash that you have available. Where are you putting it? What are the decisions you're making? We have the education. We increasingly have the funding. We control spending, consumer spending, and therefore we need to exercise that power and put money where money should be, in the hands of women and women-led initiatives.
Very well put and well said. So when you think about mobilizing the money and the power of that capital when in the hands of women, Happy, I'd like to turn to you. And if you could share a little bit more about your work at Mama Cash. And not only how are you mobilizing money, but what instruments are being effective? And as you're thinking about the grant making that you're doing, the participatory nature of it, the inclusive nature of it, how are you designing your programs to ensure impact? What metrics are you establishing? How are you going about doing it?
Don't have small questions, do you? So an ethos that guides how we work at Mama Cash is we recognize that change, lasting change, sustainable change, comes from those people who are directly impacted by the issue. I had a former boss who used to say the person who wears the shoe is the one who knows where it pinches. So we move from that ethos in that the way we work at Mama Cash is we essentially receive money. We get money from multiple sources, individuals, philanthropy, and governments, and then we move it to organizations. We move it to people who are where the shoe is pinching. So organizations, women working on issues of food security, people who are working on issues of abortion and contraception, and list goes on. And we fund them to do the work directly, and we move grants to them. How we make decisions is the communities themselves are the ones who are making those decisions, because again, the people who wear the shoe know where it pinches. So they make the decisions around who gets funded and how much. That matters for us because that in itself is built in a very strong accountability mechanism. I say accountability because a lot of times when people look at women, they don't trust us, unfortunately. So they want to make sure that when I give the money does the thing it's supposed to do. Well, we've set up a mechanism that ensures that. So from the point when folks are coming to Mama Cash and in conversation with us, they are part of a community. Everybody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And that builds in a logic of then we are able to be in conversation with a group, to check in with you, figure out how can we support you to do the thing you need to do better. And similarly, they can come back to us. I say all of this because I'm very interested in that 30 trillion that you talked about and how we can get this 30 trillion to move to the communities. Because can you imagine, right? In 1983, when Mama Cash started, there was no country in the world that had any laws on the book around intimate partner violence. Fast forward 40 years, 163 countries have laws that have been implemented around intimate partner violence. And the data is clear that this happens because there's women's movements, women's organizations working in those countries, making that kind of change. And they're doing this with 1% of ODA. So folks, can we imagine what would it look like if they had that 30 trillion? What kind of world would we live in? We wouldn't be having the kinds of conversations you turn on your news and like, what the hell is going on? That wouldn't be what we're seeing. We'd rather be like, ooh, my children are fed, I have childcare, I'm able to be safely going to work, no more war. Like, that world is possible, people. It's possible if women get that 30 trillion.
Yes. Yes. Let's talk a little bit more about that 30 trillion, if that's all right. And Nino, I'd like to turn to you. When you think about catalytic capital and the kinds of mechanisms that are mobilizing and driving that impact, how are you thinking about it, drawing from your corporate banking experience and the work that you're doing now? How can this be operationalized?
Just before I answer that, I just want to talk about, just quickly, another 1%. Many of you here, how many people are entrepreneurs here or founders? Gosh, quite a few. Now, PitchBook or Pitch Deck, I can't remember, they released a report in the last few days or weeks and showing that the amount of venture capital that is going to women-led businesses, you all know that it was sort of 2% or under, is actually 1%. Think of a circle and try to draw a 1% slice. Negligible. Sisters, we have a problem here. So that is the starting point. So what are we doing? And I will tell you what we are doing. At the United Nations General Assembly here in New York in September, we launched a new initiative called Women in Philanthropy and Impact Africa. And the reason why we launched this initiative was fairly simple. Actually, as a network, simply because women are the backbone of the philanthropic sector. But yet, what do we see when we look at the top of philanthropic organizations? We don't have too many like Happy. They do not get to the top. And yet, we know the impact when you have women in decision-making, that they support more socially led initiatives and social impact initiatives. So that's the first thing. So the network is there to actually do that. But the second thing is actually to connect with global philanthropic organizations. In that one event, by the way, the idea came to us in May. In September, we are launching at UNGA. In the room, we had at least 25 global philanthropic organizations. And we will have an event here, a small event here, a high-level dinner here. So the thing is, we're linking women in philanthropy and philanthropic organizations with the funding in order to fund initiatives that have a gender lens, not just because it's good for women and children, we know that, but because it's good for society. So that is our major initiative, and that is something that we're working very hard on now.
If I could ask you both a quick follow-up to that. When there is support for women-led initiatives, sometimes that support is short-term grants, and is project-based. And so when you're thinking about the work that you both are doing, but also what needs to be done, how can we all ensure that that funding support is long-term so that these projects can be scaled? How are you thinking about that?
You want to start? You want me to start? I'm going to go.
Who would like to?
All right. Yeah. So we spend a lot of time convincing people, call long-term flexible. I say these words so much, like, it's still not resonating. For us at Mama Cash, we work with groups for at least 10 years. And this is still seen as radical in philanthropy. 10 years. When we know, for example, it took folks over 500 years to end the formalized forms of enslavement. Yet we're getting 10-year grants. And you're like, that's radical. So, yeah, laugh with me. It's ridiculous, right? But it is constantly being in conversation with people to say to them, we actually do need to do this because change takes time. Like you said, we go forward, we go back, we go around the corner. So it is being in conversation with folk to make clear that change takes time, and working with folks like us, we can hold that line. We can keep moving the money through long term because that's what we're set up to do. But if the money coming to us is 2 years, 3 months, 6 weeks, that's not how change happens. Change takes time.
And how do you think about those long-term commitments? Anino?
For us, the first thing is when we talk about philanthropy, at WIPIA is the name of our initiative, we are looking at catalytic philanthropy, which is what Happy is talking about here. This is philanthropy that will have systemic change, philanthropy that is stepping into the places where you don't have, where the public sector funding and private sector funding isn't in, but this will open up the doors to long-term financing and funding from those two sectors. We're looking at working with organizations that realize the importance of this. We're coming to the places where the funders are. We are not waiting for them to come to us, right, with a value proposition that shows, right, based on studies, how this can be transformative. It is to the advantage, it is to the benefit of everybody. Those communities, people, men, women, to the whole world, if we can have sustainable development. And so what we're looking at is how can we transform, for example, social entrepreneurship and female entrepreneurship, where funding isn't, where there isn't funding, so that these become initiatives or these become ventures that grow, that can scale up, and that can make real systemic change in the places that they are in. So that is the way we're looking at it. We're looking at key things. Digital technology, closing the gap, for us is really important. AI and emerging technologies, upskilling, reskilling, closing the gap in healthcare. We know that once you close if you are able to close the gap in healthcare, that allows communities to become more durable, more sustainable, because when women are healthy, we know where the benefit goes to their families and to their communities.
Can I just chime in also, lifting up models of philanthropy that really are working differently. So the gifts that Mackenzie Scott made over the years, there's a lot of research that has been done to show that her model of giving checks and going like, there's the money, you go do that thing, is transformative. And it is possible to do that. So let's do it that way. Why not?
Thank you for ending us on a very positive and constructive note. The work is being done. There are models out there that can be looked to. One question to you both, for those in the audience. As we were talking about earlier, this is an opportunity for engagement. There's a great deal of expertise in the room, and often people ask, how do I get involved? What do I do? I hear you, but I want to engage. What would be either your recommendation or invitation to everyone in this room? And I'll start with you and then Happy over to you.
The first thing is that it's intentional. We're talking to a group of, highly educated, competent women. Do the research, spend some time and think about it. What is driving you? What's interesting to you? What would you think that you would like to be involved in? And there's a lot of information out there, and then go for it. My name is Anino Emua. You can find me on LinkedIn. I answer to my messages, despite the fact that I get a lot of them, and I shall point you in the right direction. But being intentional and actually taking the time to research and look at what you're interested in, you'll come up with, the information. Otherwise, do connect with me with great pleasure.
The invitation is to give to Mama Cash. I'm shameless about it. No, but in all honesty, yes, give to Mama Cash. And there is an entire network of women's and feminist funds who are set up to move money directly into the hands of activists doing work around the world. I say to people right here, right now, anybody in the room, if you want to move money to an activist in any country in the world, I can get that done for you right here, right now. We are connected. So please reach out to us. We have some brochures that we left at the front desk. My people over at that corner, please come talk to us. We can connect you and help you figure out how to get that 30 trillion to feminists around the world.
Yes. Be shameless, be bold, and engage with one another. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Now, please welcome Haley Menkes, Vice Chair of the Sol de Janeiro Foundation, along with Foreign Policies of Fuaose, for a conversation on building a business for women by women.
Hello, hello. Hello, everyone. Hello. We have had a fantastic conversation thus far. We've talked about women's leadership in politics, grassroots, philanthropy, civil society, and I'm excited to take it to the beauty industry, which is a nearly $1 trillion industry, which is driven by women's spending. And I'm excited to have Haley from Sol de Janeiro here with us today. And my first question is, can you tell us a little bit about the brand and why you all wanted to be a part of this conversation?
Sure. So I'm super happy to be here. Really, really pleased to see all of you. And I've been so inspired so far today, so I'm just thrilled. Sol de Janeiro is a very new brand. We're a baby, so the brand was born almost 10 years ago. And when I started working with the brand, we were just a teeny tiny startup. I was employee number 12, and it was wild and really, really fun. As we've grown, we have become kind of big, which has been really exciting. And it has allowed us to move money in a different way. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But what Sol de Janeiro is all about, it is a female-founded business that saw a gap in the beauty industry, and not a white space gap that all of our corporate friends are looking for to, you know, take a slice of the pie. It was really that the beauty industry, all over the world, most brands, is you have a flaw, let us fix it. You have a flaw, let us fix it. And our founder was living in Brazil and was pregnant and went to the beach and was, if you've ever had the pleasure of being on the beaches of Rio, it's incredible. And I like to say everyone there is just a different kind of hot. It's incredibly diverse, and the confidence that comes off these people is palatable, and it's incredible. So all shapes, sizes, colors, everyone. Like, they are wearing the tiniest bikinis, and they are crushing it. And that confidence was what our founder wanted to bottle. She was like, I wish I could make women all over the world feel this way. And so Sol de Janeiro was born, and now we are available in, I don't even know how many countries around the world, a ton. You can find us almost everywhere, and it has allowed us to start the Sol de Janeiro Foundation, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
I mean, it's also available on your tables. So thank you so much to Sol de Janeiro for that.
It's pronounced boom boom, for the record.
Boom boom, okay? Well, now we know that for future reference. And companies today are under more and more pressure to say something, to do something around some of the biggest cultural issues and policy issues that the world is facing. And so when you think about the brand, when you think about the beauty and the skincare industry, what role do you think that companies can play when it comes to advancing social change and making social impact?
I'm a little more concerned about what brands aren't saying versus what they are saying. The consumer goods industry is a little mysterious to most consumers, and that is not by accident. So the lack of the kind of information that I think consumers, if they were aware of, would make a real impact on their purchasing decisions is either too complicated to find or just simply not available. And what I'm talking about here is the supply chain. So I know you probably thought it was going to be lots of smiles and smelly creams and a lot of fun, but I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about supply chain. So the supply chain of the ingredients that are in your products, that are in your food, is incredibly complex. And the regulation around what brands can and cannot say is pretty loose. So the incredible equity gap that exists because of this powerful thing we call capitalism is something that we all kind of brush under the rug and we don't think about because we don't talk about. So at Sol de Janeiro, we are working to be truth tellers. We are not going to say what is on your table is sustainable. It isn't. We're not doing well enough. We have a lot of plans to get there, and I'm incredibly proud of the work we've done so far, but in no way, shape, or form is what on your table is it a sustainable product. I'm going to leave it there because I like the effect.
That was powerful. Okay, so can you talk us through what efforts has the brand taken towards better understanding its supply chain, to empowering women farmers, and really getting a hold of how to get to that goal that you're trying to get to with sustainable sourcing?
Yeah, there's a term called traceability that is very much lacking for a lot of brands. So a lot of the brands that you use and eat and whatever every day, they don't own their entire supply chain. It's nearly impossible to do that. So you might think there's, 3 steps between an olive tree and olive oil, but there might be 10, there might be 20, there might be 30. This incredible complexity makes it really difficult for brands, even when they make an effort, to understand where their ingredients are all coming from. That opens up the potential for ethical issues along the supply chain. Women are over 50% of agricultural workers all over the world. They own or operate less than 20% of the land. Supply chain issues are women's issues. And so the efforts we're putting in place are to be very transparent about the sourcing and tracing of our ingredients. So we have developed a team, and we're so grateful to our amazing female CEO for putting money and effort into this. We have developed a team that our entire responsibility, or their entire responsibility, is to follow our ingredients through those 20, 30, 50 steps all the way back to the land. So I'm going to give an example. Think about your favorite protein bar, because we're all trying to get jacked and it's sick. That protein bar contains palm oil. Palm oil is what makes it melt in your mouth and not melt in your hand. Most palm all over the world, and palm is in almost everything, guys. Most palm from all over the world comes from Southeast Asia. I think consumers would feel differently about eating that protein bar if they understood that it's a high potential that that land used to be indigenous land and it was stolen and changed. That it's monocropping and having a really negative impact on the land, water, and air for the surrounding community. The farmhands are being dramatically underpaid, and there still exists the gender wage gap even at those really menial salaries. Women are still making 80 cents on the dollar versus their male counterparts. The other issue women experience, which it's almost like you guys did this on purpose, is a really good link to the previous speakers. One of the toughest areas for women in agriculture is that they can't get access to the type of financing that would allow them to upskill their areas, their farms, their cultivations. So most women in economically depressed areas of the world are hand-picking everything because they don't have access to financing that would allow them to have post-harvest tools that would increase their yields by 20 to 30%, and just that change could take 45 million people a year out of food insecurity. Because women, as many people have mentioned up till now, when women are successful, they use that success to lift their families and thus their communities. So it makes a huge chain reaction type of difference.
So what does success look like for Sol de Janeiro as it relates to traceability? How would you know that you got it right when it came to sustainable sourcing?
I love this question because I'm never going to be happy. This is a very long journey. Changing the tides of capitalism is a challenge. However, I am absolutely 100% certain that it's going to be women-led businesses that can actually do it. So success will look like understanding and being happy with our supply chain. We're talking lots of years of lots of people doing a lot of work, which is why we have developed another arm, because there is no time. We've developed another arm, which is where I come from and why I'm here, which is the Sol de Janeiro Foundation. That foundation is intended to do faster action that we're not able to do in the supply chain because it takes so long to move those huge ships. And we can use philanthropy as our catalyst to very quick effect.
And our previous panel talked about moving money, making it catalytic So what are you excited about that the foundation will be able to do? And what are some of the key areas that you mentioned in supply chain, with women farmers, with biodiversity, that the foundation is going to really be able to make a change with?
Yeah, so the foundation is brand new. It has just launched, and we are really, really excited because we are focused on 2 areas. The first is women and girls, and the second is biodiversity. So I won't talk a lot about biodiversity today, but if you want to chat about it later, you know where I am. So in our women and girls pillar, we are focused on access. Access to healthcare, access to education, access to economic growth. And because we can deploy funding to amazing nonprofits all over the world, because we can deploy funding faster than we can make changes in our supply chain, we're using it as a way to do our part sooner. We really strongly feel that we have a responsibility to change the way things are done. And through our foundation, we have the possibility of affecting lives a lot sooner in a situation where it's kind of always an emergency. However, the foundation has sort of 2 halves. The first are the funds we donate in the form of grants, and the second is a fund we're working on growing and hope to grow it very quickly, which is an investment fund. And that is our opportunity to invest in female-led businesses and sustainable businesses all over the world, but with a real focus on the global south. That will allow us to not only fund nonprofits, but fund these startup businesses or these small-scale businesses that are actually making economic difference for women and communities.
And when we think about corporate impact, it happens along a variety of dimensions, and we've talked a lot about external. So as we wind down, I want to talk about internally as a company. You were employee number 12. This company is now large, it's been acquired. What have you learned personally about how a company can run to deliver impact for its customers, but also for its employees and team members as well?
Yeah, I mean, I say all the time that if a brand like this, if you have an opportunity, check out our Instagram or look at our website. I often say if there was a brand like this in the 90s, I probably would have had a much less complicated relationship with my body growing up. So we are absolutely, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said, there shouldn't even be a question. Like for us, it's not even a question. There are women and individuals of all shapes and sizes, colors, abilities, whatever, who are different kinds of hots. And we celebrate that. So you see that in our advertising, but you also see it in our organization. Diversity isn't something we strive for. For us, it's not a question. And obviously, the beauty industry has largely female clients. It's really female money that runs this industry. And the beauty industry has probably the most obvious glass ceiling of any industry in the world, because it is basically all women. It's like 90% women until you get to the top, and then it's all Caucasian men. It's a stark difference. It's slowly changing, but in my opinion, not fast enough. But I am so thrilled to work for a female-led business. She was our founder, she remains our CEO. And she had this kind of dream when she was younger. She was working in banking, she worked in the beauty industry, and she was like, what are all these men doing here? Seriously, like what are all these men doing here? I want to be one. I want to be up there, I want to be one of them, and she crushed it. So something that is really inspiring about our leader, her name's Healy Yang, is she is unbelievably confident, like man-level confidence. And that distills its way through the organization in such a way, again, that people mentioned earlier, in such a way that women are empowered and inspired to take risks, to do something different, to speak out. And you know, we're an organization that went from 12 to 400 and only continuing to grow. And hopefully we can be that role model, that catalyst. We are currently the #1 beauty brand in the prestige industry in the US. Like, people look up to us at this point. Oh, thank you. People look up to us at this point. People are copying us at this point. So let's give them something to copy. Copy our philanthropic efforts. Copy the way our business runs. Like, we are all on the same team, even though we're competitive brands. Like, let's change the way products get onto the shelf such that capitalism isn't exclusively built on the exploitation of economically depressed countries.
Thank you so much, Haley. That was fantastic. Thank you for sharing your insights and your background. Closing statement. This evening, we're going to be enjoying our products. We're going to be lathering up. Do you have a mantra? Is there a brand mantra that you all use internally that inspires that confidence, that go-getter nature that we should be thinking about while we're using it?
Oh my God, we have a manifesto that I do have memorized, but that would take a couple minutes, so I'm not going to bore you with it. It's beautiful, though. But I will say, Sol de Janeiro exists to embolden self-celebration and connection through the power and warmth of the Brazilian spirit. It's all about really, truly enjoying what you have, knowing that you are one of the different kinds of hots, and connecting with other people. You will notice as soon as you start opening stuff, this whole room is going to smell. In Portuguese, it's called cheirosa. It means to smell really good. This whole room is going to start to smell, and our sense of smell is one of the first things that we notice because it's a really primitive sense. It's going to connect you. People, if you are wearing the Boom Boom cream, somebody will come up to you on the street and be like, "You smell amazing. What are we doing here?" Complete stranger. It's lovely. It's really lovely. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Here's the connection, everyone. Great. Thank you so much.